Oh, you're on the Dodger Game channel, and we are taking a gander at the document called A Letter to an Apostle by Paul Douglas, addressed to Dieter Friedrich Uchdorf of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Paul was seeking some answers on some very perplexing questions that perplexed his ability to reconcile certain facts in LDS history with the assertion that an all-knowing, unchanging God guides the church through these brethren. So we're on a chapter that's going to be about Joseph Smith's rap sheet. So I'm going to cruise over here to the actual letter. What do we got? A letter right here. Here we go. Does Joseph Smith's extensive rap sheet, including his arrest, trial, and likely conviction for money digging, treason, attempted murder, and bank fraud, comport with being a prophet of God? Well, obviously, that sounds a little racy for a prophet, but let's check it out. Let's see what he's got to say. We've heard plenty of people bad-mouthing the dear prophet. Bunch of Anti Mormon propaganda, no doubt, right? Let's see what we got here. So far, Paul has been laying down some evidence, some factual information in his prior chapters. So let's see what he's got. All right. State of New York versus Joseph Smith. Warrant issued upon complaint upon oath of Peter G. Bridgman, who informed that one Joseph Smith of Bainbridge was a disorderly person and an imposter. Disorderly? What was he doing? A rap sheet. Maybe he had a time machine and he was listening to rap. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? I'd hate to think that the dear prophet did anything like that. Come on, prophet. All right, I'm having some trouble with my phone here. Next, keep reading here. Prisoner brought before court, March 20th, 1826. Prisoner examined. Says that he came from the town of Palmyra and had been at the house of Josiah Stoll in Bainbridge most of the time. He had a small part of time had been employed by said Stoll on his farm and going to school. He's just a young student, probably out partying, got in trouble, right? Well, let's see. Let's not jump to any conclusions here. That he had a certain stone, which he had occasionally looked at, to determine where hidden treasures in the bowels of the earth were. Say what? That he professed to tell in this manner where gold mines were, a distance underground, and had looked for Mr. Stoll several times, and had informed him where he could find these treasures, and Mr. Stoll had been engaged in digging for them. That at Palmyra he pretended to tell by looking at this stone where coined money was buried in Pennsylvania, and while at Palmyra had frequently ascertained in that way where lost property was of various kinds, that he had occasionally been in the habit of looking through this stone to find lost property for 3 years, but of late had pretty much given it up on account of it injuring his health. Okay. So looking at a brown seer stone was tough on his health. It was kind of hard on his eyes. Maybe he needed a trip to his local optometrist. The court record plainly shows that Joseph Smith was involved in magic practices At the same time, he was preparing himself to receive the plates for the Book of Mormon. Hey, that's okay. Doesn't Richard Bushman say that's just Heavenly Father's way of, getting him ready to be a prophet? Practice a little magic first. Besides that, especially if you're going to use the same stone to channel the content for the Book of Mormon, as it basically tells us on LDS.org now, according to Emma Smith and David Whitmer. We already had that, but it is a little new for the church to admit this after they said it wasn't the case for so long. Actually, they told us it was the case, I guess, long ago, and then they decided not to tell us it was the case. So it wasn't cool to tell us that. These Christians have got so many problems with magic. They think it's wrong. Maybe they've been reading the Book of Mormon. It says it's wrong, too. It is interesting to note that in the court record, Joseph Smith confessed that, quote, for 3 years prior to 1826, he had used a stone placed in his hat to find treasures or lost property. That means that in 1823, 3 years after he claims to an angelic visitation, that's what it says, he was also engaged in treasure hunting. Yeah? Mixing magic and Christianity. That seems to be a problem with the Christians. It seems to be a problem with the Book of Mormon. It seems to be a problem with the book of Isaiah, the book of Exodus. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. And they didn't in Salem. At least that's what they say when they put the witches on trial. I didn't really think the methods were too cool. It's basically once you're accused, you toast. Yeah. Here's the test. We'll throw you with a millstone or something tied to you in the water, and if you drown, you were innocent. Oh well, you went to heaven that way. If you get out of it, you must have been a witch, so now we'll burn you alive. Yeah, that sounds, anyway. Thank God for the Bill of Rights. Surely this is highly damaging to Smith's character, for according to Joseph Smith's own testimony, he began his money-digging activities in about 1823. He also claims to have found the gold plates on September 22nd of 1823. Of course, we can note that happens to be the equinox, and he got it at midnight, dressed in black, and all that good kind of stuff. It's all, coincidental that it's all witchcraft stuff, right? Of course, you probably didn't know that, right? Before this discovery, LDS historian Francis W. Kirkham couldn't bring himself to believe that Smith was a dishonorable con man. How dare you use those words, even in the same sentence as Joseph's cherished name. That he cheated people out of their money with assurances that he would find buried treasure using a peepstone in a hat. He wrote, "If such a court record confession could be identified and proved, then it follows that his believers must deny his claimed divine guidance, which led them to follow him. ... How could he be a prophet of God, the leader of the restored church to these tens of thousands, if he had been the superstitious fraud which the pages from a book declared he confessed to being?" Excommunicate that man. You're not supposed to talk like that about the prophet. He was a church historian? Okay, well, I guess he thought it was anti-Mormon propaganda. A New Witness for Christ in America, Volume 1, pages 3, I guess, 8, I don't know. Check it out. Hugh Nibley, perhaps the most prominent Mormon apologist, good old Hugh, says, "If this court record is authentic, it is the most damning evidence in existence against Joseph Smith." Is it? I don't think so. I think Fanny Alger and her baby with the prophet might be a little more damning. But they probably put it up for adoption with LDS Social Services and got rid of the evidence so the apologists can say, yes, I'm joking, obviously. It never happened. He went on to also state that if the authenticity of the court record could be established, it would be the most devastating blow to Smith ever delivered. Well, Hugh, it is, and it is. That sounds like amen and amen. This guy's probably been to a temple dedication and he's into repeating himself. in ritualistic form. Fair Mormons suggest the proceedings did not constitute a trial, but rather more of a preliminary hearing. Hey, guess what? Who cares? That's why Paul says he was likely convicted. Yeah, so Fair Mormon, once again, they like to divert us from the real thing because, Christians like to say Joseph Smith's a convicted felon. That wasn't a felony. There were other things that were felonious that he may or may not have been convicted of. I don't think he was convicted of any felonies. Doesn't mean he didn't commit any, but this was more like a misdemeanor conviction, I would think, if it was a conviction, in fact. And so they want to bring us to the point, he was never convicted. Well, so if he's not convicted, does that mean he's innocent? Of what? See, that's not the point, Fair Mormon. Guys, whoever wrote that, Peterson, Hales, Gordon, whoever it was, of course you know that. That's not the point at all. Who cares if he was convicted of glass looking? You already convicted him. It's in the Gospel Topics essays. You admit he was a glass looker. You admit he was a gazer at the Seer stones. What's to be convicted of? Oh, that he was defrauding people? That he was cheating them by faking that he could see stuff? Well, I imagine that's a matter of speculation. However, what does seem to be of interest is that he actually states here that he utilized this device, this magical device, a rock, which had basically a spell cast on it. It was enchanted, it was consecrated, dedicated, set apart through witchcraft to be a magical instrument, just like a crystal ball or a dark mirror. That's the point. Because the Book of Mormon talks about magics in the land and witchcrafts and how awful they are. But we find the prophet is confessing that he is a practitioner of the magical arts. So that appears to be a bit of a contradiction between, all this business about staying away from witchcraft, magic, familiar spirits, all that sort of a thing that we read about in the Jewish texts that we've got in the Old Testament. So, yeah, that's like saying, you want to be the president of the church and you're all righteous, but you've been running a brothel. Or, you're running a bar. Or you own bars. Or you're in the liquor business. What, you thought I was talking about Brigham Young? Okay. Yeah. So, that goes back to Paul's original question. Does that comport with, being what a prophet of God is built up to be in our minds? Is that what a prophet of God's supposed to be? Is it? Well, we shall see. Oh, that sounds so familiar. So, that was about magic, and magic not being purported to be compatible with Christianity these days, at least. Might have to go back a ways before that's deemed to be okay. But what about the other business about Joseph Smith's character then? So either he was a magician practicing the dark arts, or he was not. If he was not, and he was only pretending to see things in a seer stone so that he would mislead people and basically rip them off, that's definitely not something good. So let's see what material Paul has got that might relate to that. All right, so he's got a statement by Peter, a sworn statement by Peter Ingersoll, which says the following. In the month of August 1827, I was hired by Joseph Smith, Jr. to go to Pennsylvania to move his wife's household furniture up to Manchester, where his wife was then was. When we arrived at Mr. Hale's in Harmony, that's Emma's dad, PA, Pennsylvania, from which place he had taken his wife, a scene presented itself truly affecting his father-in-law, Mr. Hale, addressed Joseph Smith in a flood of tears, saying, "You have stolen my daughter and married her." They eloped. "I had much rather have followed her to her grave. You spend your time in digging for money, pretend to see in a stone, and thus try to deceive people." Joseph wept and acknowledged he could not see in a stone now, nor never could, and that his former pretensions in that respect were all false. He then promised to give up his old habits of digging for money and looking into magic stones. Mr. Hale told Joseph if he would move to Pennsylvania and work for a living, he would assist him in getting into business. Joseph acceded to this proposition. I then returned with Joseph and his wife to Manchester. One circumstance occurred on the road worthy of notice. I believe this is the only instance where Joe ever exhibited true Yankee wit. On our journey to Pennsylvania, we could not make the exact change at the toll gate near Ithaca. Joseph told the tender that he would hand him the toll on his return, as he was coming back in a few days. On our return, Joseph tendered to him 25 cents, the toll being 12.5 cents. He did not recognize Smith, so he accordingly gave him back the 12.5 cents change. After we had passed the gate, I asked him if he did not agree to pay double gateage on our return. No, said he, I agreed to hand it to him, and I did, but he handed it back again. Alrighty. Kind of reminds me of getting too much change at the cash register, except for I handed back the correct amount and corrected them. Joseph told me on his return that he intended to keep the promise which he had made to his father-in-law. But, said he, it will be hard for me, for they will all oppose, as they want me to look in the stone for them to dig money. And in fact, it was as he predicted. They urged him day after day to resume his old practice of looking in the stone. He seemed much perplexed as to the course he should pursue. In this dilemma, he made me his confidant. Looks like confidant. And told me what daily transpired in the family of Smiths. One day he came and greeted me with a joyful countenance. Upon asking the cause of his unusual happiness, he replied in the following language. As I was passing yesterday across the woods after a heavy shower of rain, I found in a hollow some beautiful white sand that had been washed up by the water. I took off my frock and tied up several quarts of it, and then went home. On entering the house, I found the family at the table eating dinner. They were all anxious to know the contents of my frock. At that moment I happened to think of what I had heard about a history found in Canada called the Golden Bible. So I very gravely told them it was the Golden Bible. To my surprise, they were credulous enough to believe what I said. Accordingly, I told them that I had received a commandment to let no one see it. For, says I, no man can see it with the naked eye and live. However, I offered to take out the book and show it to them, but they refused to see it and left the room. Now, said Joe, I have got the damn fools fixed, and I will carry out the fun, quote unquote. Notwithstanding, he told me he had no such book and believed there never was any such book. Yet he told me that he went to Willard Chase to get him to make a chest in which he might deposit his Golden Bible. But as Chase would not do it, he made a box himself of clapboards and put it into a pillowcase and allowed people only to lift it and feel it through the case. In the fall of 1827, Joseph wanted to go to Pennsylvania. His brother-in-law had come to assist him in moving, but he himself was out of money. He wished to borrow the money of me, and presented Mr. Hale as security. I told him, in case he could obtain assistance from no other source, I would let him have some money. Joseph then went to Palmyra, and, said he, I there met that damned fool Martin Harris, and told him that I had a command to ask the first honest man I met with for $50 in money, and he would let me have it. I saw at once, said Joe, that it took his notion, for he promptly gave me the 50. Joseph thought this sum was sufficient to bear his expenses to Pennsylvania, so he immediately started off, and since that time I have not much been in his society. While the Smiths were living in Waterloo, William visited my neighborhood, that's Joe's little brother, and upon my inquiry how they came on, he replied, We do better there than here. We were too well known here to do much. All right, whatever that means. So that was the sworn testimony of Peter Ingersoll. I'm not sure what the occasion was. Joseph Smith was, maybe he was being tried for something, or who knows. All right. I certify that on this 9th day of December, 1833, personally appeared before me the above-named Peter Ingersoll, to me known, and made oath according to law to the truth of the above statement. All right, so there we've got that little business there from the person taking the testimony. All right, now he says, Joseph's rap sheet below comes from an article by Diane Tingram in Mormonism Schism. So he's got 1830, New York. Smith performed an exorcism in Colesville and was again tried as a disorderly person. He was acquitted. The account of the exorcism in this article about the Knight family can be found on LDS.org. The article on LDS.org, which also discussed the trial, has been removed by the church. Interesting. Okay, so I've actually read that in a couple of different places, and I've read it with this more toned down version, which doesn't give some of the details that the other one gives. But I think it was, I don't know, was it Newell Knight? Somebody was possessed by the devil, we were told. And in the more dramatic rendition of it, as I recall, he was floating around the room, and his face was like contorted to the point of, it was almost like, I don't know, like shape-shifting or something. He was changing shapes, it sounded like, from what I recall reading a little bit. I mean, just, I don't know, maybe his head ballooned up. I don't recall, and they'd had all sorts of strange things occurring. He was floating about the room, and Joseph Smith casts out the devil. And in the more dramatic rendition of it, these people apparently saw like the devil turn into like a form of like or some rodent, like a muskrat, and run away or something. I've also read it where it doesn't mention anything like that, but it just says he cast out the devil. So I'm not looking at that, so I could have gotten a detail or two a little wrong there, but yeah, really floating around, appearing to change form somewhat, and then the devil, when he was cast out, appeared to be like some woodland animal and ran away. So that was, pretty unusual sounding. Okay, hey, why persecute the guy for casting out a devil? All right, so 1837, he's got Grandison Newell accused Joseph Smith of plotting to murder him. Okay, that sounds kind of in line with what William Law and Joseph Jackson, some others said when things were getting rough in Nauvoo. But this is before Nauvoo. This is 1837, Grandison Newell accused Joseph Smith of plotting to murder him. So it says Joseph was eventually acquitted. Did he intend to have Newell killed? We don't know, but the testimony of church leaders and employees revealed just how seriously the prophet's followers took his remarks, supposed offhand remarks. We're now being counseled to believe they were. In either case, statements by two apostles and other close associates no doubt undermined Joseph Smith's reputation. Wilbur Denton and Sidney Rigdon both testified that the alleged conspiracy took place in April or May 1835. Orson Hyde testified that when rumors began circulating that Newell might sue the floundering Kirtland Safety Society, the Kirtland Anti-Banking Safety Society, known as the Kirtland Bank, but it was an illegal bank, Joseph Smith seemed much excited and declared that Newell should be put out of the way, or where the crows could not find him. And he said that destroying Newell would be justifiable in the sight of God, that it was the will of God, etc. That sounds exactly like what Joseph Jackson said, that Joseph Smith always said that it was the will of God when he wanted to have someone killed. All right. After 1838 in Kirtland. After a warrant was issued for Smith's arrest on charge of banking fraud, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon fled Kirtland for Missouri under cover of nightfall on January 12, 1838. This incident had to do with the failure of the Kirtland Safety Society anti-banking company, and with charges of fraud and illegal banking, including the illegal purchase of Monroe Bank in Michigan by Smith and Rigdon. Oliver Cowdery was named the Monroe Bank's vice president, which saw him move to Michigan to run that bank. So, profit by day, mafia by night. 1838. The more you learn about the Kirtland banking thing, the more obvious the whole, crime family thing gets. The more you read about what was actually going on, how they were making money and things. 1838, Missouri. On November 1st, 1838, the Mormons surrendered to 2,500 state troopers, and agreed to forfeit their property and leave the state. Joseph Smith was court-martialed and nearly executed for treason. But militiaman Alexander Donovan, I thought he was like a general or something, who was also Joseph Smith's attorney, coincidentally, probably saved Joseph's life by insisting that he was a civilian. Smith was then sent to a state court for a preliminary hearing where several of his former allies, including Danite commander Samson Avard, turned state's evidence against him. Joseph Smith and 5 others, including Sidney Rigdon, were charged with overt acts of treason and transferred to jail at Liberty, Missouri, to await trial. All right. In 1839, Smith tried to escape at least twice during his 4-month imprisonment. On April 6, 1839, on their way to a different jail after their grand jury hearing, he finally did escape after bribing the sheriff. Subsequently, as was his custom, Joseph Smith and the Mormons fled the state, this time moving to Illinois. Yeah, okay. 1838, that's about the time we had the extermination order issued by Sidney Rigdon on the 4th of July against all people who were becoming apostates, leaving the church, wouldn't give the property to sign it over to Joseph and Sidney. And so some of the people fled into to the authorities, to the governor, seeking protection, and they wound up that Boggs issued an order which we know much more famously as the extermination order for the Mormons, to get rid of them because the Missourians, including members of the church that were wanting to keep their property and not hand it over, like W.W. Phelps and David Whitmer and maybe Thomas B. Marsh, didn't want to be forced to do so or forced to leave, as President Rigdon assured them that they had only 3 days that he could assure their safety while remaining in Caldwell County, Missouri. Banking fraud. The Kirtland Bank was created in the state of Ohio by Joseph Smith, who named himself cashier, and Sidney Rigdon, who became the president. However, because the venture was underfunded, says Paul, a banking charter was refused. I'm not sure why they refused it, but they did refuse it. The state of Ohio refused to give a bank charter. And they'd already ordered the necessary plates for printing their money, so they just altered them a little bit and made it say anti-banking or something instead of bank. Not to be deterred, however, Joseph and Sidney declared it an anti-bank. You know, when you can't get a bank charter, just create an anti-bank. Why not? And depositors were lured in because Joseph Smith told his followers that as a prophet of God, the bank could never fail. I've read a bit on this over the years, and telling the people that God would bless them for investing in this bank, and then it failing completely because God apparently didn't tell Joseph Smith that there was going to be a financial crisis. And Joseph Smith apparently took the liberty with his fellow friends there of faking assets, shall we say, piling coins on top of junk, making it look like they had boxes filled with, silver and gold or whatever. There were a lot of fraudulent things done. So they ran away again when the warrants were issued. As often as they could, they just left. What we keep seeing is a pattern of a crime family, a mafia-style business that was going on that Joseph Jackson testified to in some detail. All right. Joseph Smith told his followers that as a prophet of God, the bank could never fail, says Paul Douglas. Warren Parrish, who had been an officer in the bank and had apostatized from the church, made this statement. Yeah, when did he apostatize? When he saw what was going on there at the bank? I have listened to him, this is Parrish, Smith, saying of Joseph Smith, I have listened to him with feelings of no ordinary kind when he declared that the audible voice of God instructed him to establish a banking/anti-banking institution. So did God say this before or after they couldn't get their bank charter and decided it was going to be the anti-banking bank? Who, like Aaron's rod, shall swallow up all other banks? like Aaron's rod eating the other snakes. Oh gosh, or like the stone that was cut out of the mountain in Daniel's dream that ate up all the countries. Joseph's bank is going to eat all other banks. The Bank of Monroe accepted, and grow and flourish and spread from the rivers to the ends of the earth, and survive when all others should be laid in ruins. Wow. From the rivers to the ends of the earth. I can just imagine Joseph Smith declaring this in all his majesty. Now is the day of my power. I rule from the rivers to the ends of the earth. There is none that dares to molest or make afraid. I have a word for these people. If they do not walk up to every covenant they make at this temple this day, they will be in my power. Where have I heard that? I don't know. I have to think about it. Maybe it was a movie. However, problems arose when merchants and businessmen began to redeem or try to redeem their anti-bank notes. Joseph knew that the bank did not have enough cash to cover the notes. In other words, they made fraudulent money. And that an old-fashioned bank run would ruin the bank. Smith and Rigdon resigned as officers, and the bank did indeed fail. Now we got some quotes here. If the bank needed a final blow to shatter what little prestige it held among the faithful, it received it when Warren Parrish resigned as cashier, left the church, and began openly to describe the banking methods of the prophet. Parrish was later accused of absconding with 25 grand, equal to about $500,000 in today's money, says Paul. But if he took the sum, it must have been in worthless banknotes, since that amount of specie in the vaults would have saved the bank. All right. Not actually sure. So we got a footnote there. Not sure who that's attributed to, having said. Joseph Smith's delusions resulted in many faithful Mormons losing their life savings and faith. Many people who were given worthless banknotes in exchange for gold and silver deposits, convinced that Joseph had intended to swindle them from the onset, attacked him verbally and threatened him physically. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon fled Kirtland during the night in January 1838 to escape bank depositors, it says. I'm reading a lot of this here. But, this is important factual stuff because we don't need a bunch of, generalizations and so forth. We need to see factual information as to what they were actually doing that caused this massive apostasy in Kirtland. Half the church apostatized. Can you imagine if, half the church apostatized, in a matter of a couple of weeks right now? I mean, what would cause that, including half the apostles? The toppling of the Kirtland Bank loosed a hornet's nest. We're in quotations again here. Just not sure who we're attributing it to. Creditors swarmed in upon Joseph, armed with threats and warrants. He was terribly in debt. There was no way of knowing exactly how much he and his leading elders had, quote-unquote, borrowed, since the loyal Mormons left no itemized account of their own claims. In other words, everybody who still believed in Joseph Smith didn't. They just kind of let it go and said, oh, well, so we lost our life savings. There's no accounting of their portion of it. All right. But the local non-Mormon creditors, whom he could not repay, brought a series of lawsuits against Joseph, which the county court daily recorded. These records tell a story of trouble that would have demolished many people. A lesser man, it says. A little editorializing there. 13 suits were brought against him between June of 1837 and April of 1839 to collect sums totaling around almost 25 grand. The damages asked amounted to almost 35 grand. He was arrested 7 times in 4 months, and his followers managed heroically to raise $38,000 required for bail. This is starting to sound like Fawn Brody in No Man Knows My History. Of the 13 suits, only 6 were settled out of court, about 12,000 out of the 25,000. In the other 7, the creditors either were awarded damages or won them by default. Joseph had many additional debts that never resulted in court action. Some years later, he compiled a list still outstanding of Kirtland loans, which amounted to more than $33,000. If one adds these, add it all up, and it's a lot. He's got 30 and 30 and 60 borrowed in New York, and anyway, says he's got Mormon leaders owed to non-Mormon individuals and firms over $150,000. Okay, Joseph had his Mormon bank capitalized at $4 million, a huge sum of capital when, at the time, in the entire state of Ohio, the total capitalization of the banks, of all banks, was only a little more than twice that, about $9.3 million, setting itself up for failure. How did he capitalize a bank at $4 million? Well, we really don't have a lot of facts about that, do we? For some casual observers wanting to see the Mormon bank assets inside the vault were boxes filled with gold and silver coin. However, the boxes were just filled with sand and then a thin layer of coin laid on top. This shows fraud, not just mismanagement. Lining the shelves of the bank vault were many boxes, each marked $1,000. Actually, these boxes were filled with sand, lead, iron, old iron, stone, and combustibles, but each had a top layer of bright 50-cent coins. All right, that's got a footnote down there, footnote number 10. So, not sure who, maybe that's Warren Parrish. You have to check the footnotes and see. So come read it. Let's go a little bit more on this just because it's detailed. This illegal bank began, of course, with Joseph Smith receiving a revelation from God himself. Wilford Woodruff, who later became the 4th president of the church, confirmed that Joseph claimed to have had a revelation concerning the bank. During the summer of 1837, Joseph spent much of his time away from Kirtland to avoid these lawsuits. Apostles Luke S. Johnson, Lyman E. Johnson, and John Boynton were rejected and disfellowshipped. The blame for the bank failure fell heavily on Joseph. He had issued a formal invitation to his followers to take stock in the venture, and the institution had been organized outside of the law. Heber C. Kimball later was to comment that at this moment there were not 20 persons on earth that would declare Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. 6 of the apostles came out in open rebellion, just like the devil, right? Why should they think that God couldn't waste all their bank money investments? And what's wrong with God lying to them and saying that they would do well if they invested in the bank, and that would devour all other banks? Good grief. Sounds like maybe he got it mixed up. Maybe God was talking about Chase Manhattan, J.P. Morgan. Okay. Fair Mormon claims that Joseph Smith was never convicted of a crime. Oh my. That proves his innocence for sure, Fair Mormon guys. Joseph Smith was persecuted in courts of law as much as... Oh, who said this? Fair Mormon claims that Joseph Smith was never convicted of a crime. Their website quotes Joseph Bentley, a lawyer who worked on the Joseph Smith paper legal volumes. Can't imagine that he's not LDS. Joseph Smith was persecuted in the courts of law as much as anyone I know, but he was never found guilty of any crime, and his name cannot be tarnished in that way. All right, so forget all the facts. We'll just believe that, since it came from somebody that Fair Mormon's all about, an apologist for the church. This is, of course, incorrect. I just provided, this is Paul speaking, provided one example above where he, Joseph Smith, was found guilty along with Sidney Rigdon for banking irregularities. As well, yeah, oh, did I read that part? Anyway, yeah, they were each fined $1,000 after they were found guilty. As well, there is no question that Joseph was arrested and appeared before Judge Albert Neely. There was another case where there is much stronger evidence that Joseph was convicted on August 1st, 1843 of the crime of assault. Alright, so he beat up some dude, a tax collector, and he bragged about it. So what? Okay. I'm not going to worry, I'm not going to read that one. You can enjoy that one if you go ahead and take a look at this. Now here's a few others. Joseph Smith had an extensive number of interactions with the criminal justice system, says Paul. His problems with the law were extensive and continuous from his first disorderly person fraud trial in 1826 to his second arrest for treason and inciting a riot in 1844. No way, man, he was just persecuted. It was the devil trying to destroy God's holy church. Come on. Okay, so here's the rap sheet. March 1826, disorderly person. June 1830, disorderly person, trial number 1 before Chamberlain. June 1830, disorderly person, trial number 2, 3 judges. February 1837, tried for illegal banking, or charged with it. I know he's found guilty, I guess, wasn't he, of some? All right, 1837, conspiracy to murder Grandison Newell. 1838, January, banking fraud. August 1838, threatening Judge Adam Black. Sounds like a mafia boss. 1838, August, threatening Judge Black. I just read that. November 1838, treason against Missouri. August 1842, conspiracy to murder Governor Boggs. Yeah, well, since he hired Porter Rockwell to kill him, and Porter Rockwell shot him 3 times and didn't kill him, went to jail, they couldn't find the weapon. Joseph then hired Joseph H. Jackson to spring Porter and finish the job on Boggs for $3,000, plus he gave him a horse and carriage. Or maybe it was just a horse. Horse and some stuff, according to Joseph Jackson. Anyway, treason against Missouri, perjury, fornication, and adultery in May of 1844 he was charged with, inciting a riot, and treason against Illinois, June 24th. But he didn't get to stand trial since he was killed by the mob. These are just criminal matters involving Smith. There were also many civil matters in which he was the defendant as well. Alrighty, so here we got a bunch of lovely references there. Anything else I want to comment on? Fornication and adultery, yeah, it was illegal. It was a criminal act, and since he had the spiritual wife system, Joseph Jackson said Joseph Smith had bragged about having his way with at least 400 women. He estimated there were at least 600 women in the spiritual wife system in Nauvoo. No wonder the church wants to talk about Joseph Smith marrying other men's wives and 14-year-olds and anything to keep the number around 33. instead of 600. He made Solomon look like a wimp, huh? Okay. As a matter of fact, if we look in the archives here from our time travel buddies, we've got something that really precedes the whole, Mormon WikiLeaks that Ryan's got going. We've got anti-Mormon WikiLeaks, where actually Joseph Smith was caught with some of his spiritual wives. We just have this little clip that maybe we can listen to here.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.
Well, that's about all we can share right now. I don't want to get hit with any copyright infringement claims, but anti-Mormon WikiLeaks, we thank you. Read Paul's stuff. It's pretty interesting. For now, Dodger game out.